the idea of getting back into nature, and that goes even beyond just the forest. I mean the components that operate existence in the way in which they were created to be harmonic together. So everything is like the truth. We live in a world full of lies. And I think it's because something is trying to write algorithms into this code where up is down and left is right, and none of this is natural to what was the original source of creation, because it has to be so chaotically shoehorned, and you're just like shoving a hose down someone's gullet and pumping them full of whatever in order to get them to accept it, and you won't. I think the meaning of life is to learn to be human and learn to seek the truth in an inhumane world that's nothing but lies. And I think that essentially the life energy is like the path. That's the pathway that you're on. So in the sense of Orgone and Reich, it's using technology, using tools, certain very specific tools, to counter the technology that's been established to create that artificial realm in the first place.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a very interesting episode for you today, so I hope you're ready for your noodle to be stretched to some places it may have not been before, because I know when I listened to this gentleman, Mitch the Orgone Donor, on Daniel Prince's podcast, Once Bitten, it was very, very interesting to me, and I immediately put you on my bookmarks to bring on as well, because I think you have some really interesting ideas about some extremely important topics that people aren't thinking about around energy, EMFs, 5G, geoengineering, how nature works with all these things. It's fascinating to talk about. So without getting too out of hand there, Mitch the Orgone Donor, thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ben, for having me on, and I love to talk. Anyone who follows me on social media knows that Mitch likes to talk, but specifically, I like to talk about a solution to a topic that is really, it's one of these things that everyone looks at as an agenda, and I look at it more as a byproduct of something even more grandiose. And that's what I want to sort of whittle down and offer some solutions, because it's a very daunting topic, as we'll jump in. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here and always eager to, anyone willing to listen and give the time of day, I am there for it. So thank you.
Excellent, man. And I think a good way to start off here is just a pretty wide open introduction for people who are wondering why we're here today. So I would say, let's give you a scenario here. You're just given a magic microphone button that allows you to speak to every single television network, every person's cell phone around the world, and you can talk to these billions of people, tell them whatever you want, and you have all the time you need. What would you say to them right now?
I would tell them to go to my website. And I know that sounds simplified or simplistic, but the reason is because I have, as we discussed before, even before the camera was rolling, I try to gauge each conversation I have, because people who've listened to me over the years, who've listened to me long enough, there's a range between like the entry point and like what we call the freshman level of things, up to the incredibly bizarre exploration of reality as a whole. And of course, there's not enough time in the world to research that. I've been doing this work that I do for a little over, I think, around 8 years now. And there's not a day that goes by I don't learn something new. I don't explore a new perspective. I don't connect another dot or put another puzzle piece together. So what I found, though, is, as simple as my response was to that question, I got into this work specifically because I thought it was the concept was stupid. And what I mean by that is this idea about orgone energy, what's called orgonite, that we'll talk about today. The components of, I knew geoengineering existed and the whole weather modification concept, but the idea that there was something you could do about it that went pretty far beyond, the head scratcher of all head scratchers. And so I set out to actually prove it wrong, being sort of the ego-driven person that I am. And for the last 8 years, I've been nothing but pleasantly surprised. So what I've found over the years is when I cast a net and say, who's willing to listen to me, I've kind of found there's a formula, for I might find 100 people in a group willing to listen for 5 minutes, and 99 of them think I am the craziest person. I'm insane. This is dumb. It doesn't work. Or it's like, it's always conspiratard or whatever they want to say. But there's always that one person, at least one out of that group, that's going to say, you know what? Even if I don't agree with this, I'm going to go try and prove this right or wrong. And in my case, it was I set out to prove it wrong. So if you do that enough times, and I think you apply that to everything that you're trying to, I don't like the word educate so much, but when you are trying to expand somebody's awareness of something that's existing in reality, I think by casting that net, I will take my chances with the one person who's willing to do that. So putting out a call with that button to the entire world, it might not, I mean, the majority, hands down, I can say they'll just write it off, ignore it, whatever. But there's going to be that one person that is curious, because there's always somebody, and I know a lot of people watching this are curious about tons of stuff or they wouldn't be here. But there's always that one who, when you get that shtick or that thing that you gravitate to, and you're like, I have to know more. There is this strong desire to have to know more. And so statistically speaking, there's always going to be like at least that one. I think there'd be more. But so yeah, when I would push the button, that's what I'd say is, I'd say not just go there, but I say, I I don't know. I don't have the exact articulation for what I would say as far as what would be on the other end when you visit that button. But I have curated material in a way on my website that kind of helps guide the freshman level to the. I use the term I use the term consciousness pissing contest. I don't like that people are having the awareness pissing contest with each other, or thinking, we know more than they do or whatever. It's like, that's not what it's trying to be, but that there's a flavor for everybody to jump in at the level they're comfortable with when they want to learn more. So that's, I'd push the button, then I'd run to my website and like make sure everything else is in order, just so that 1% of every 100 people would kind of be ready to jump in. So
I can completely respect that. I'm the same way. This is something I've been working on for years, is building these websites that are sort of rabbit hole guides that walk people through the different steps from the beginning, so I can just hand them off to a resource that I know will work super well. And I definitely am with that. So I'll make sure to put your website right there in the show notes for people to bookmark. In terms of the actual content that they will be finding there, maybe we should start giving them a refresher. And I think that one of the quotes I pulled from one of your past podcast episodes that I think could be a good entryway here would be, you have stated your goal as destroying the artificial realm so the natural realm can flow. So could you walk me through what you mean by this, what each of these realms are, compare and contrast like what they actually mean when you are talking to someone? Like, how do you explain these two realms and why this is really important to understand?
So with the background information specifically about like orgone energy, for anyone unfamiliar, orgone energy is a concept of an energy form. It goes by several names. I use the term orgone because I go through the sort of the school of the father of orgonomy, known as Wilhelm Reich. He's sort of like a Nikola Tesla type figurehead from the past. Um, and it's not the end all be all of any conversation or any educational path, but I follow the Reich method of, it's called orgone energy, it's life energy. There is something that is keeping existence, keeping the natural realm in a flow in which everything resonates. And people, it doesn't matter whether you're just looking at Bitcoin. I mean, things resonate within reality, and when they resonate, they're harmonic, they go together. They don't have what I call that artificial introduction or artificial influence. So when you talk about the artificial realm versus the natural realm, what I'm talking about is sort of the screwing up of the natural flow of energy, and the theories behind this universe being operated by frequency, energy, and vibration, which are loaded topics, I know, because of I blame the sort of new age concepts for that. But there's validity in, from a physics standpoint, that the universe operates on energy, frequency, and vibration. And technically, I think that's a famous quote from Nikola Tesla. He said, in order to understand the universe, one must understand energy, frequency, and vibration. I know there's a debate now on whether he actually said that, but I think the quote itself still applies. And so this idea of an artificial realm, when I'm talking about an artificial realm, if you look around the world today, there's a lot of stuff that's been shoehorned into reality that just doesn't belong here, that doesn't go here, that doesn't fit. It's chaotic. And that can be something as simple as a social issue that's been shoehorned in to a narrative with the media. It can be something physical. Where I go into the backbone or the foundation of this concept through someone like Wilhelm Reich's work. He wrote a book called The Cancer by Apathy. Now, Reich, he was an Austrian scientist, and he was a doctor and a psychoanalyst. And his basis for his experiments were to show that when this particular energy that he coined as orgone is out of alignment or is transmuted into something negative, because it can be its energy can't be created nor destroyed. It can just be transmuted from one form to another, according to our own even mainstream physics and the law of thermodynamics. But it's this idea that you throw things out of alignment, and one of those out of alignment things could be something like cancer. Two topics he covered a lot were cancer and infertility, two things that are essentially the anti-life, or they're like a frequency of anti-life. It's essentially death. And so his experiments that he did in order to put a person's energy back in alignment and to concentrate orgone back into their physical body, it would create a chain reaction where it put things back in alignment, and it's like you're turning the natural realm of that existence back on. And so when I look at like the artificial versus the natural, I look around at certain tools, or what I would call weapons, but I look around at certain weapons that are frequency based, and they are helping to perpetuate what some people would call the matrix or reality. I call it sometimes the Borg, the AI, the artificial realm. And so also, I'll backpedal here for just a second and say, for some people, as far as the term orgone, other cultures will refer to it when you hear someone say chi or prana or life force, things like that. I've joked before in the movie Star Wars, they would call it the force. So it's that idea of some call it like godlike consciousness or the God spark. Um, and if you listen to me long enough talk about the God spark, or what I just call it the life energy. And essentially there is this life energy that it coerces through everything and keeps it in alignment, and that there is an artificial there is an attempt, there is an intentional concerted effort to exert an artificial realm over the natural realm. Sort of like if you go into the concepts of what the earth is, or how we got here. Some people, you'll hear a lot late. I mean, I try not to go into this too much, and we're not going to talk about it today, I know, but like you'll hear people eventually talk about soul traps, or you'll hear them talk about the meaning of life. What's the meaning of life? I think the meaning of life is to learn to be human and learn to seek the truth in an inhumane world that's nothing but lies. And I think that essentially the life energy is like the path. That's the pathway that you're on. So in the sense of orgone and Reich, it's using technology, using tools, certain very specific tools, to counter the technology that's been established to create that artificial realm in the first place. Because there's more than just that media blip or that artificial idea, that get your 12 boosters and this is safe and effective, for example. That term, it's like, why does stuff like that exist when there are so many people like and you're like, why is this a thing? It is a thing because it's been manifested into reality with a shoehorn effort, and it doesn't belong here. Because when you add something artificial, you now have cut a code, or what I look at the world as, or the reality as algorithmic. Everything is just algorithmic codes of the universe that would fit together by the source of creation. Well, if you start shoehorning artificial stuff in there, now it might obstruct other things. It throws other things out of alignment. Now I got to write more fake code and put it in over here to counter that, and then put a Band-Aid on over here and a Band-Aid on over there. And so eventually you just end up throwing off everything in this natural realm, and you end up with this artificial reality that sort of wants to play God, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've been noticing, which has been sort of a mind-blowing epiphany to me, just because I think you and I had a similar upbringing where I grew up very far on the left side of the political spectrum just through my family. And we are always, being told like climate change is scary, scary, bad, bad, and it's your fault. You need to, use a paper straw, and you need to stop driving a car, and you need to recycle and do all these things. And everything's really framed in a way where the individuals are at fault, and how they're always promoting these solutions that they're coming up with. And the more that I've researched down this rabbit hole, it's really, they are creating the problem so they can sell you a solution. And they're secretly, quietly creating a problem in the background while selling a solution, which is going to continue creating more problems, more artificial world, more issues that are just going to disrupt this energy field you talk about. And I'd love to just dive into a little more. You talk about that there are certain weapons being supplanted into the world around us that many people may see. Some things they see, some things they don't see. What are the main things people should be aware of and start keeping an eye out for when they're looking around their daily lives, trying to become more aware of these things going on?
Yeah, so for those new to this, the idea of creating, I use a term that over the last few years I've started using this term a lot more, called the frequency fence. And I talk about, like, you'll hear people talk about HARP, or you'll hear a lot of conspiracists talk about CERN, like, oh, they're going to turn CERN on during the Olympics, or whatever, though they're doing another ritual, or there's some kind of weird coding that's going on. I mean, whatever. The elites are busy being elites and doing elite things. And so the if we had this conversation years ago, I would have told you that, like, the weapons were cell towers. That's a head scratcher for a lot of people. The communication towers, that essentially what they're doing is creating an EMF bubble. And of course, everyone is on board, I think, who would be watching this, like, oh yeah, EMF is bad. Like, we shouldn't be subjected to it. Turn your Wi-Fi off at night, or don't wear a Bluetooth all the time, and try and minimize what you can. What I've found is that the devices themselves are working together, that all of this, it's an artificial non-harmonic frequency that is working together to create a type of bubble, or what I call the frequency fence. And then within that fence is when you can start this manipulation process, the manipulation of reality. And that can include things like, you'll hear people, this is going to sound far-fetched, I'm sure, to a lot of people, and it won't sound that to others, but like the idea of manipulating brainwaves. Now, that's a physical component, but there's something happening in the web that's been created that is, in a way, cutting through. I've used the term, or the phrase, cutting through the fabric of reality, that you're manipulating the elements. And if you get into very strong New Age concepts, and if you listen to me long enough, you're going to hear me rip on New Age concepts, because I don't trust or like the love and light stuff. I don't trust saviors. I don't want any of that, and I think it's a deception. However, I think there's a lot about reality that's coming to light, that this place is not purely physical, that there is something going on, sort of, some people might call it the fourth dimension, or an etheric, or people call it the ether, essentially. And these different types of technologies that are able to predict and read your mind, and things like, people talk about the quantum computer. I've sort of migrated over time to no longer just think that this is cell towers, and we're not just putting orgonite around cell towers, because that's generally how this started, was putting orgonite around EMF devices. And that's the orgonite, which is based on the work of Reich and orgone energy. It's like you're changing a frequency, you're fixing that frequency, and you're putting things back into harmonics with the universe. So you can put orgonite around cell towers. But as time's gone on, I've for myself, I mean, this is my own philosophy, and people can dive into all of my work. I'm not just saying this to say it. There's plenty of this to back up for hours of entertainment on your own time. But it's every single EMF device and radio wave and every Wi-Fi router. And you start to pinpoint that there are these patterns in the way society's going, where if you look at the push in order to get people to put more and more of these frequency tools around their, or frequency weapons around their everyday life, it starts to make a lot more sense when I hear someone write to me and say, Mitch, I got a smart meter put on my house and they tried to arrest me when I took it off. And I'm like, well, that's a little extreme, don't you think? And it's like, well, why? And of course, there's somebody who, the naysayer will say, well, because the energy company owns that. No, because they for your safety, they don't want you to tear it off. It's like, I can assure you that no, they don't want you to tear it off, but it has nothing to do with just legality. They use legality to make sure you don't tear it off, because your home is now helping to contribute as basically a mini cell tower, or a beacon of sorts that feeds that same frequency fence. So over time, a lot of these weapons, and this is where I get easily frustrated, and I try really hard not to, but it's very difficult. But like, people will talk about HARP, and most people, if you research HARP, it's HAARP, high frequency auroral, or atmospheric aurora. I can't even think of it right now. It's a facility in Alaska, and it was owned by the government. I believe they sold it to the University of Alaska Anchorage, but it was think of basically a football field full of towers that are used to bounce frequencies off of the ionosphere. And for years, that has been considered this weather manipulation tool, as it's sending something out into the ether, and it's like ionizing the sky, radiating the atmosphere. It's causing all kinds of havoc. But over time, I've gravitated away from that, where I now tell people HARP is just a facility. HARP is not just a facility. HARP is a network. So it's the Bluetooth speaker in your house. It's the LED lighting that's now been mandatorily put in America, at least, or in the US. There's a reason they got rid of incandescent bulbs, to magnify that bubble again. The last time they magnified the bubble was the expansion of 5G, when all these towers went up magically while everyone was stuck at home. I doing what I do, I get hundreds of emails at least a week. And at the time, I was getting what felt like thousands, and it was from parents who all said the same thing. My kids were away, we took them back to school, and this thing just magically popped up on their school. Every school in America now has towers all over it. And we can go into logistics of why they use schools. It's not for communication purposes, at least not those types of communication purposes, but it's this network of every single device, and turning the home into a smart home, and essentially just creating this bubble that you can't get out of. And within that bubble, you can you can manipulate every portion of reality and just throw complete chaos, until eventually you write enough code that you've completely wiped all of natural existence, and now you are essentially God. So it's a very deep topic, and I'll just say this one thing and then shut up about it. To get a really good understanding or comprehension of the weapons themselves, there is an electrical engineer and physicist who I love. I don't agree with everything he says, but I like him a lot, and his name is Eric Dollard. And he was on an episode of the Higherside Chats. I believe the episode is from October of 2019, so just shortly before the Wuhan wiggle began. And he talked about, basically, like, he doesn't talk about orgonite. He doesn't talk about anything I talk about. I talk now about what he talked about, and that is, we are creating with our technology, and we're sort of creating the portal, or we're creating this energy field based on this non-harmonic, anti-life frequency, that we're essentially creating the gateway for Satan or for the devil to come right in and take over. And I know that sounds really, really dark, but it's like that. Just think of that as like a foundational backbone behind why these tools could be bad. And his whole explanation about that and what these tools are feeding into this reality, I just think it was when I first heard it, I thought this it doesn't answer all the questions, but it's a really good concept that there's more going on than just putting up a cell tower. Because I'm sure everyone's noticed that no matter how many towers are out there in the world, so many of us, myself included, still have garbage dump levels of reception all the time. And it's because these phones don't that if there is a component that works with those towers, it's minimal at best. And when people talk about things like, oh, there's going to be a solar flare, there's going to be an EMP, or the power will go out, I guarantee you, if that happens, the towers will still work just fine, because there is a component to the frequency fence that does not get talked about.
So would it be safe to say that these towers are in fact not being put up so I can watch cat videos on TikTok at a better speed?
uh, to be fair, I think there's still a connection, because it's the idea of what's going on with you on an energetic level when you're watching those videos, and when you're being, not just socially programmed, but something deeper. And there are a lot of signs. It gets very etheric based. You have to take a step back from modern day physics to be able to look at this. And this goes back to why I am so upset half the time at the new age stuff, because people see the hippie, they'll see a bunch of ecstatic dancing, and they'll be like, oh, a bunch of probably trust fund babies who pretend nothing's wrong in the world, and it's just like there is nothing wrong going on, love and light, love and light. So they write off everything, and it's like, well, there's truth to the etheric. There's truth to something we can't see physically with our eyes because we're not in tune with it. But I think a lot of people even watching this would know, like, there's a reason we have phrases like "be careful what you wish for." And I'm sure people in all venues of all podcasts, like at this point, everyone's heard about the ideas of manifestation. People have heard about humans being creator beings. I'm of the mindset that humans are creator beings, not so much that you can you can't just love and light your way into getting the lottery numbers, and that's not how this works. And that's why I don't like the new age, because it's like it focuses on that, and it's like, no, there is something about humanity that, as creators of reality, it's why they're manipulated. It's why something wants to pull the strings, and it's why there is this component that is tapping into people however it can, and it does it through the ideas of frequency, energy, and vibration. And even when you look as more closely as like the recent events of 2020 and the needles, they're doing something to the human body as well. And it's like, it's not just the food, they genetically modify the food. Well, part of the reason you genetically modify the food isn't just so you can like cause cancer. It's so you can cause chaos, because it's not natural. It's not harmonic. And it's not so much that the food is just poison. It's that the food is just dead. There's no life force in it. There's nothing for a human or living being to take from it, because we live in a system. You got to take from somewhere. There's always, that's how the cycle works. And so when you artificially start creating these other components of reality, now you got to start plugging it in with things like genetically modified food. And just as a side note, like for people that there's always going to be people that say like GMOs are fine. One of the things you'll come across if you dive into the orgone and orgonite and life energy or scalar technology, that kind of stuff, plants will eventually, GMO plants will eventually convert themselves back into heirlooms if you leave them alone long enough. And it's interesting to me when I watch the attack on the human body and, well, humanity as a whole. It's interesting. I think it's from the movie Jurassic Park, when that guy says, you didn't know whether or not you could or you should or blah, blah, blah. But he says at the end, I'm just saying that life finds a way. And in a way, like what I've learned, that this isn't just about busting towers, what we call it, busting the frequency with things like tower busters and orgonite, but it goes deeper, that there is something intentionally doing this stuff, because we will always keep we're just clawing to get back to God, or trying to get back to creation, or you don't have to be religious too. I'm not trying to be religious when I use that word, because it can be interpreted several ways. But the idea of getting back into nature, uh, and that goes even beyond just the forest. I mean the components that operate existence in the way in which they were created to be harmonic together. So everything is like the truth. We live in a world full of lies. And I think it's because something is trying to write algorithms into this code where up is down and left is right. And, there are more than, I won't even get into that. But like when you start seeing the pronouns on people's profiles, I'm just like reminded, and I'm like, none of this is natural to what was the original source of creation, because it has to be so chaotically shoehorned, and you're just like shoving a hose down someone's gullet and pumping them full of whatever in order to get them to accept it, and you won't. So
And one of the things that you mentioned there, which I think is a good tie-in to some of the other episodes I've had on before, just talking about how places where the most vulnerable people are, the schools and hospitals being two big
yeah.
ones. These
So
are
yeah.
in early episodes, like one I did with Nina Teicholz, is the author of The Big Fat Surprise. She talks all about food and how food has been poisoned, and we've been given all these guidelines for how people should eat 11 grains of 11 servings of grains per day to be healthy, and just total nonsense. And you walk in any school or look through the window, and there's going to be vending machines full of crap. All the lunches are total crap. Hospitals, crap everywhere is all they feed you, which is just insane when you think about it, because that's supposed to be a place of healing. It clearly isn't. It's a place to get sicker. And now we bring in these towers that are being put around all of these places. And I encourage anyone out there, if you live near a hospital or a school, just walk around. You probably see one of these giant towers just blasting radiation right next to it. And I know that I do love that you gave us sort of an insight on like the really big picture idea there, and just sort of where people can move their way up to as they go through this rabbit hole. But I would like to just take it back to a term that most people have heard about, just the 5G. People have heard about 5G being talked about. It's on tons of ads on TV. Oh, 5G is so good. It's so good. We have the best 5G. No, we have the best 5G. And right as that's happening, all these towers are coming up. The different communication networks are talking about, how just 5G everywhere. And I know you're talking about how there's much more to look into than just, the surface level of what these towers are actually doing to people. But could we maybe just take it very basic? When you see those towers, what are they actually physically doing to human beings and the web of life?
Well, so you can always look up the physical components. The non-ionizing radiation itself, if you study things like grounding, there's a reason people say take off your shoes. You're discharging built-up ionization. You're a negatively charged. All life forms are essentially negatively charged. That doesn't mean negative. It just means they're going to the polarity of that. There's this excess radiation, or these electrons that are radiated out into the atmosphere, and they're going to need to stick to something. And so you can find the connections between the things like the cancer. That's a big one, or tumor growth. And right now, I think there's actually an epidemic of young kids having cancer in certain areas around their reproductive organs, because they were born with the phones in their pocket, and that's where they keep them. I also find it ironic that, like, usually on a hospital, it's like, if you look, where's the cancer ward? It's like, oh, just look for the cell tower that's on the building. And I'm like, it's difficult for me to explain the physical components of. We know it's bad. You can look up. Let me finish that statement. Just, we know it's bad. It's that after you dive into that and you start asking, like, well, why is this happening? Why is this? Why? And then you start sort of reverse engineering what's going on and looking at that bigger picture. Then that's why it branches off into all these beyond the physical things. But there is a gentleman, for understanding the physical components. There's a doctor I came across in 2020 His name's Dr. Thomas Cowan. A lot of people watching this probably already know of him. And he did a presentation specifically on the electrification of the atmosphere, that there's a lot of coincidences in like the pandemic happening around the execution of the 5G network. And the last time that happened, the last time like a large, what you would call a pandemic, I guess. Obviously, nothing shut down, but like look back to H1N1, was at the swine flu, I believe, at the introduction of 4G, and SARS, the SARS in the early 2000s, the introduction of 3G. When you look at things like the telegraph and the Spanish, I think it's the telegraph was connected to the Spanish flu. There's this weird coinkydink between the electrification of this reality or this world, this planet, and people getting really, really sick. And that really, really sick that they're getting isn't just cancer. So that's one of the safe havens for the nefarious force that's doing this stuff, because you can say, well, I live under the power lines and I didn't get any tumors. And it's like, well, we're all mapped differently, and it's different. It's whether or not you're tapping into it or not. But as far as the 5G, when I hear people talking now about 6G, um, my my initial reaction is I don't really care about any of the numbers that they keep going up, and they're like, oh, but they're using millimeter waves, and I'm like, it's the frequency. It's a bubble. It's just the bubble is the bubble. 3G, like people will say, oh, get an old phone, get a flip phone. I'm like, it's just no. There's no safe phone. So it's like it's just all of that non-ionizing radiation that's contributing to this giant bubble that we live inside of, and it's becoming more difficult to escape. Um, the one of the people who came on my radar, like I have this whole like laundry list of people that when I say something extreme, or something that's really off the cuff or bizarre to someone who's just jumping into these topics, they're like, well, I promise I'm not just saying this, because it's like I have a reason for it and years of comparing notes and puzzle pieces. Well, one of those puzzle pieces for a lot of people is going to be Alana Freeland, who wrote the book Under an Ionized Sky. And that's going to go deeper on the physical components that, there is something being blasted into the atmosphere. It's still the same concept, and you're ionizing clouds. You're preventing hydrogen bonds from forming. You are basically relocating rainstorms or killing them altogether. And so that's where for anyone wondering, like that's why the cell towers, when I say cell towers help to control the weather, that's that connection, is that they're contributing to that bubble of ionization. It's one of the reasons you'll find so many giant towers on tops of these mountaintops, especially where I am in Sedona, Arizona. I'm in the Verde Valley area, and we've ventured to the tops of all these mountains, like the Mingus Mountains. And if you've ever been there, you're aware of what the hell is on top of that, and it goes forever. And it's just like, interesting. You've got these beast machines that are as high up as you can get, contributing to that overall atmosphere blast. So as far as you can link things like Bluetooth to tumors in the head, and you can obviously link the cell towers to thyroid problems. I tell people with Apple Watches, I have a family member that wears one and can't figure out why she has a problem with weight loss. And there are those components. You can always go back to the physical components of this stuff. It's that there's that underlying, what I would call the militaristic side, I guess. Because if you go bust a bunch of towers, here's an experiment people can do. If you're going to start playing with Orgonite and you're going to go bust a bunch of towers in your town, or meaning you're gifting out this stuff. We use that term gifting, because it's a gift from you and you're the one paying for it. So it's like if you go out and do that and you put it all around these towers and you start doing this grid work, you're going to notice the goons from the telecoms coming out, and they're going to be trying to figure out what's wrong with their towers. But your internet's not going to go out. Your cell phones aren't going to stop working. And it's like there's something else going on that even I don't think they're privileged to know about it, but there's something wrong. And so it's a really bizarre web that I know we can only and will only go so far with it in today's conversation, but it's, if you can at least see what I mean when I say it's always bigger, it's always deeper, and it's more than just EMF. Because EMF in and of itself is not necessarily bad. There are plenty of, even your own heart gives off an EMF. And there's a reason they wanted us to stand 6 feet apart from each other, so that the bonds, that the ties that bind, do not have the ability to do that. There's a reason why you are either connected to and attracted to or repelled by other people. You can sense their energy. And I think animals can sense energy probably better than we can, because they're probably more in tune with their natural instincts. Ours have been bastardized by the frequency fence, among other things, chemicals and social programming and all that. So yeah, as far as the physical components, you can do, when people write to me and they say, what can I do? And they typically, what they mean is like, can I get one of these things? Like I got standing behind me, this is a cloud buster, which we'll come back to it, but I want to just show as a visual.
I
They
think
want
that'd
to
be a
jump.
perfect sort of finale. We can
Yeah,
bring that in as a
sure.
solution. Yeah.
They want to jump in, they want to do whatever, and so I'll always write back and I'll have sort of a contingency plan for them that's like, here's what you should do based on where you live, your neighbors, whether you have, do they have these charging stations in the neighborhood, and are there 5G poles outside, and what's your proximity to water, because water is connected to this, and that's a whole other can of worms. Um, Look for water around cell towers, you'll always find it. Um, because it's a conduit, a very strong conduit. And so there are those types of things you can do, but I will always also explain that, like, we need to get away from this technology to the best of our ability, which is it is probably the biggest uphill battle that I've ever encountered myself. Uh, I hardwire my home. We completely silence everything at night, and I'm very fortunate. I live, even though I said Sedona, but I live outside of Sedona in a tiny village of retirees, and no one here really has any super advanced tech yet. Um, and so it's very quiet. So when you power off your Wi-Fi router at night, you turn off your phones, everything goes in boxes into the other side of the house, and like, because these things, I swear to God, they're still working even when they're off. But it's very, very low EMF. And it's one step away from a total Faraday cage over my bed. So I always encourage those types of things. Where can you cut back and what can you do? And that's the hardest part. Nobody wants to do that because we're addicted to technology, but also, to be fair, we're also reliant on it. And I know that that's not fair to a lot of people when they say things like, well, I have to do this for work. And my heart goes out to them. I completely understand. Um, it's it's something that I think is going to get to a point that is so in our face and so terrible that there will have to be a mass exodus of using those things. But that could include traveling, because I know I'm one of those people that says, I'd like a pat down, please. And I know the TSA just love those people who ask for the pat down, and they're super extra nice to those people too. So it's it's like, what do we, or I had to do, actually, I had somebody who bought some stuff from me recently, and I agreed to join an app to collect it. Biggest mistake that I made this year, because I was being asked to subject all these biometrics, and I learned that these phones are actually doing, I know they scan your face and they do all these things. They've always been and always will be more advanced than anything they're going to tell you they do. And what they're scanning, what they're looking for, goes so much deeper. And again, reel me back, but it's those types of things. We're going to have to make a choice and decide. Same thing with people paying more for a smart meter. If you can get the smart meter off of your house, then I recommend it. I find it weird that smart meter companies, if they were just pulsing once per month, it's like, just, we're going to do it at this time for this thing, whatever, and they just did it, and then they got their readings, that'd be fine. But they don't. They do it, I think it's like anywhere between 5 and 20 times per second forever. And it's like, there's no reason at all to do that. And so, between things like that and the LED lighting, people think that that decision was made to save energy. LEDs don't save electricity. And there is such wonky evidence bias evidence to show that it's better for the environment, because if you've ever used an LED bulb, I'm sure you've also replaced those LED bulbs more than you ever replaced your incandescents. And they're made of plastic and many more chemicals inside. So it's sort of like the electric car battery. And I have to be careful because I get so much hate when I talk about that. But it's like your power still comes to the battery from the similar sources that your power comes from the gasoline, and the amount of resource. When you look at the bigger picture, then you ask yourself why. Why is this happening? Why is this being orchestrated in this way? And it's like, at best, it's to make you sick, but it's to make you sick physically, spiritually, mentally, etherically, all of those things. So,
Man, so much to dig into there. I got just way too many bullet points to even try
sorry
to.
about that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. This is great. I'll just like rattle off a few things that ran across my brain as you were going off there. First of all, the Apple Watches, just one of the examples you use is these, EMF devices that they're just like convincing you should put these things literally on your body. You should
Uh-huh.
put AirPods in your ears, which are just microwaving your brain. You should have these watches on. I've seen videos of those watches leaving burns on people after they wear it long enough. So like clearly not good. And we haven't even begun to see the effects of the freaking AirPods, which everyone is wearing now. Everyone I look around is wearing these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I did an episode with a guy named Zaid Dahaj. I just double checked on my list of episodes here. It's episode 33, and we do sort of a rundown on all these different devices that are being put around us, and we're being sort of coerced into wearing on our body, and
Mm-hmm.
just how terrible this is for our health, and why we need to be thinking much more critically about just asking much more questions and understanding that there are big money forces that are trying
Mm-hmm.
to make this seem like it's all okay. Because all of these big tech companies, I mean, the classic examples when you're trying to find the answer to this stuff, where do you go? You go to Google it. Well, do you think
Mm-hmm.
Google wants you to know that their phones and their network and all of their products are also damaging you? Probably not. So that's why you're always going to see, the first bazillion things on search are going to say, oh, it's totally fine. So you have to really dig deeper to get the
Yeah.
answers to this stuff.
I think in order to bridge the gap between looking at what's going on just physically and deciding, oh, I want to know more, or I want to make sense of why this is happening, because it's always going to be in the name of making technology better. As kids, when we were in school, we might see, like, what was it, Highlights magazine, and you see these images of the future, and it was always we were going to have flying cars and all this stuff. And I'm like, best I can do is stay at home orders and clot shots, and so um, it's if you want to see more or understand deeper, look at when you mentioned the wrists, people burning their wrists. I find it really interesting that when you look at the Apple Watch, it's connected to the heart. When you look at the Aura Ring, which has a creepy name in and of itself, it's called the Aura Ring, and it's one of those fitness tracking type things. I know people who follow me on Instagram who have bought Organite from me. They've talked about some real dark stuff from a frequency standpoint, and they still wear an Aura Ring. And that's on the middle finger. And now this is conjecture, or this is an assumption, or a hypothesis. I don't know what you would call it. There are some there's a long list of coincidences between the connection of the middle finger and the heart. That might be why it's the universal signal for saying F you to somebody, and adding a negative connotation to it that is connected to your heart center. And I don't want to get into like the chakra stuff. I do believe in aura, though. I believe that's a person's basically their biofield, and those biofields are attacked on every front. But these things that are connected either to the heart, or again the heart, or if it's not the heart, it's the brain. And the more you're looking at all the central nervous system, and like what it is that taps in like our intuition. Everybody, I'm sure people listening, they've heard about fluoride. Maybe some are okay with it, maybe some are completely against it. um, I know it's a neurotoxin. That much that's easily proven. I don't know about the third eye. I think sometimes that new age stuff gets a little. Um, I find it weird that there's just like this one component of the human body that's apparently in touch with God. I think a person's collective is in touch with God. I think people have intuition and instinct. And I think your discernment is also measured on an etheric level. When you decide what's best for yourself, or when you have creativity, when you get something that people would call a download, well, it's like all these devices seem to be conveniently created for those locations on your body that are alleged to be the connection. All the antenna in your body is being obstructed. And of course, they're also minimizing the senses. Um, when you look at things like the Apple Vision Pro, it's like, I know a lot of people were physically just getting sick from the spatial awareness issues of that, of wearing it for so long. But you're blocking your own optic nerves from seeing what's actually in front of you. And you are creating a completely different reality. You're shoehorning it into your psyche. So all of these things, they not only have interesting names like Aura or the Amazon Halo. I don't know if anyone even knows about the Amazon Halo, but the Halo is a device that sits next to you while you sleep, and you don't even wear it, and it tracks everything about your sleep. And I think to myself now, we all used to dream. I dream a lot. I'm very fortunate, and I do exercises to dream, and I treat my life. I live a healthy enough life that I think now, like, I dream every single night, and I dream pretty pleasantly. And if you go to my website and look at reviews on like people who've purchased things like this Orgonite, that's actually a very common um, that's a common observation that's made, usually something with sleep patterns, because you're being zapped differently when you're asleep. But these things they're very angelic named, or they're named with some weird etheric name, and like Amazon Echo is what it's called. And I'm like, well, what is that echo? And I know they're going to say, well, because you say something and it says something back. I'm like, well, that's not an echo. So an echo is a resonance, it's a sound, it's a frequency. And I'm like, what is this device really doing? So all these things are tapped into this body and tapped into our body in a certain way that just goes so much deeper. So
Absolutely, and that's where people need to just start tracking. And one of the concepts I bring up so often on the show is just self-experimentation, the power of really trying new things and trying things that maybe sometimes sound crazy, but only crazier to your current paradigm, and just keeping a journal of how you feel. And that's a perfect example, dreaming. I definitely notice differences in how much and how vividly I dream when I do different things. And I spend a lot of time in the diet world, as you probably know. I have found a huge increase in that activity and just the quality of my sleep in general when I personally did the carnivore diet and I stopped eating. I cut out the seed oils and the processed crap and even the plants. And for me, that just brought my brain to a whole new level. I'm just having a lot more fat and it's making things a lot more active. And this is just like a different facet of this same search for optimal health that we should all be looking for. And it's super fascinating that, because this is more of an invisible one, because people are very aware of the food they're putting in their mouth, or at least what they think they're putting in their mouth, or whether or not they're right about what they're doing is debatable a lot of the time, but they are at least physically seeing this object that they're putting in their mouth. And when you're talking about the EMF and these frequencies all around us, it's a lot harder for people to really conceptualize that because it's invisible, obviously, and they can't see it with their own eyes. And even things that people can see with their own eyes, it's hard for them to really come around to these things. And speaking of that, I'm so glad you talked about the giant towers on the mountaintops, because I was in Nashville recently for the Bitcoin conference a couple months ago, and I was staying in an Airbnb up in the suburbs, and I was there for about a month before the conference at the end of July, because I wanted to be in Nashville for the 4th of July. It sounded fun. So I was in this area where there was like this tall hill to climb up, basically. And at the top, there's this big open field where I would lay out and try to get my sun time. I would, get my sunbathing in, get some grounding in, and just do that every single day. It's sort of a routine. Like, I'm trying to get in these good routines of stacking these good habits. And you could see from that hill just these rolling mountains all of them are covered in these huge towers. And I remember vividly because I would sometimes walk up at night too, and I'd just see these red lights blinking all over these things, and just it was like a Christmas trees everywhere, giant red Christmas tree just lighting up at night. So, and on top of that, I started watching the planes above me, and just these giant streaks in the sky just start to pop up more and more. I literally from my bed I could open my window and I would wake up to just the lines in the sky. And I started paying more attention as we start to learn about these interesting weather manipulation, crazy conspiracy theorists that are talking about chemtrails. And if you hear that word, your brain just totally shuts off. They're totally crazy. You don't want to listen to those people. Well, I was being very cognizant of the sunlight because, like I said, I've been going down the sunlight rabbit hole for quite a while. Just the benefit of getting sun on your skin and how healthy that is for the human body. And so I was really looking at the sun closely, and every single day, pretty much like clockwork, you could see the difference in how clear you'd start with a clear blue sky, and then those streaks would all pop up all over the sky, and then haze would just come over the sun and just cover it by the end of the day. So I literally just saw this happen enough times. There's no point to even come out after like 4 p.m. because it's just a haze. And I would have to do it in the morning before all the lines came up. And all these things are just wild, different parts of sort of the same conversation of what you said earlier, which is like, this is an attack on the human body. Like there are this electric fence, the frequency fence you talked about all around us, that's mixing up our biology. The sun, which is like the giver of life, is being blocked out. And meanwhile, this is another piece that maybe we could talk about is we're being filled with heavy metals from all over the place. There's every single day we see some new headline of like, X thing is causing heavy metal poisoning, and they're finding heavy metals inside like fetuses now because they're so ingrained inside human bodies. And I can only imagine what having metal inside you does as we have all of these frequencies pumping all over us. So could you maybe give us a little insight there on where this connection is, the heavy metals and the frequency collaboration?
Well, I think if you, because we use the term heavy metal for, everyone in the conspiracy or any type of truth-seeking venue is going to use that word. I would say let's maybe swap out the word metals with the word conductors. And all of a sudden, a lot more makes sense. Like we're being pumped with heavy conductors to change our frequency. One of the components to this work and like realizing this is more than just, busting towers or changing the weather. It's, if you look at like electroculture, if anyone's not familiar with that, think gardening with antenna. And are you familiar with, have you by chance seen, I have a video on my YouTube page. It's from my garden from last summer. I didn't have time to garden as much this year because it was a lot of work, but showing different types of antenna and incorporating, for me, I incorporate orgonite into my electroculture, but just imagine a crap ton of copper all over the garden that is being used to basically help to mitigate different frequencies around those plants that hurt them and to help enhance growth. And what a lot of people have found, it's become a buzzword. Electroculture has become very booming over the last couple of years. Everybody's sticking something in their garden as far as an antenna to help plants grow faster, greener, more abundant. And there is a huge rabbit hole in that venue. But when you compare it with conventional gardening, at some point, like you can go back to old farming practices from, I'm painting a broad stroke to just say native cultures. I don't like when people just say, oh, ancient cultures this, and now you must believe me. But there are civilizations on record that have had huge success with old farming practices. And those farming practices involved planting at certain times based on astrological events, based on the moon, based on the sun, based on the direction that things were being grown, the formation of the garden. There was just more to it than just sowing seeds. And so there were all these different components and these different forms of electroculture and antenna and things having to do with electromagnetic fields and essentially the life energy of the plants. over time, a lot of those things have been stripped. They've been removed. The soil has been killed. All the conductors in the soil have been removed, and they've been conveniently replaced with fertilizers. And now modern farming practices just rely on fertilizer. And it's typically, of course, now I'm freezing, but was it nitrogen, potassium, and is it, I forget what the third one is that's the most popular.
I cannot help you here.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm
it's
gonna.
okay. I'll have to look it
I'll
up.
get flack for that. I'm seeing like NPK, what, and nitrogen, phosphorus, I think, and potassium. And so anyway, when you're using electroculture, that you don't need those types of things. And when you're using electroculture, which I learned living in the desert in heat waves, uh, your plants are able to thrive better. They last weirdly, and when you're using really good, I would say good quality, meaning you've set up a proper electroculture unit, your plants coincidentally survive longer in frost and survive longer in heat and survive better with less water. Now, those are three things. Now it's like, well, it's like, why? Because we just assume they need vitamins, minerals, nutrients, fertilizer, essentially. They just need good minerals in the soil, a good dose of sun, and water. And that's becoming not the case as more people. I mean, you can just type in electroculture on the internet. And I actually have a friend of mine who's down in Scottsdale. A lot of people might already know him, but his name's Matt. And he has a website, Cultivate Elevate. And he is sort of he knows a lot about electroculture, and he had given me some tips, and I just was like, well, I'm going to take electroculture and incorporate my orgonite into it and put things like the earth pipes, which is a copper pipe filled with orgonite you hammer into the ground to discharge built up ionization and help basically neutralize radioactivity. um, you're helping plants grow faster. Orgonite, there's a lot of individual experiments and observation in this, that when I said early on in the conversation that I was that one person who wanted to go prove something wrong, I just started doing everything I could. As every piece of information was thrown at me, I heard about the plant test. And that's when I learned, oh, my plants seem to react differently when I put this stuff around the plants. They seem to grow, they sprout faster, they grow faster, they stay greener, they have fewer ailments, fewer things like parasites, mites, hornworms, any type of the critters and bugs that we don't want. I found weirdly with electroculture was the first season I had no mite issues or aphids. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. Why is it that the parasitic bugs coincidentally disappear when you enhance the electromagnetic fields of these individual plants and they maintain their own field of energy? Like, they're basically left alone to do what they need to do. I also learned that having copper around plants and having orgonite around these plants would, during lightning storms, because we get no shortage of that with monsoon seasons here, coincidentally, the days after every single monsoon, it's like you'd have new buds, new fruit. Strawberries were a great measurement tool for that, and so were zucchinis, which are two very water heavy fruits that, I have found that water dense stuff, and people do electroculture and watermelon as well, because it's like there's a component about water. Well, when I was learning about orgonite, I came across the water tests and the structure of water, and people like Dr. Masaru Emoto. If you're curious, it's Emoto, Dr. Masaru Emoto. And he has a documentary called The Structure of Water, or The Secret of Water. Water has been found to be like a computer chip that can maintain a memory and can be structured or programmed with an intention, which sounds uber weird and bizarre. But essentially, imagine somebody doing experiments where they are loving and applying positive reinforcement, positive energy, positive collective energy around water, and watching plants grow faster with less, and doing the same thing on a negative component where you're trying to toxify the water. You break apart, instead of feeding water to plants in spirals and whirlpools and things that flow natural like streams and rivers, you put it through crappy PVC pipe, and you bend angles and you flow water differently. And all of a sudden your plants react differently. Everything's negative. You start to kill stuff. If you neglect water altogether, he showed that just setting water down and leaving it with this, he did these rice experiments. It's like the rice that was in water that was loved lasted forever, and the water that was hated started to die, but the stuff that was left completely alone and neglected completely went black, and it was dead instantly. And it's like, well, that's interesting. So it's like it goes to the theory of like where attention goes, energy flows. And when I said before, be careful what you wish for, and all that big web of the manifestation and this weird fabric of reality, that's where you get these connections in these frequency tools. But as far as bringing it down back to the plants and the GMOs, you know, people think GMOs are just made because, oh, it'll need less water. They're going to create all these things that will only survive, that you have to pay for year after year. Now, it's interesting to me, GMOs, a lot of like Terminator seeds, they've literally taken the life out of something to keep it from continuing to procreate, almost as if you've thrown someone out of alignment with frequency and caused cancer or infertility. And which then goes back, that puzzle piece goes back to Wilhelm Reich. And then from there, I start dissecting this, and then it starts dissecting this, and then it starts dissecting this. And so, as far as the physical components, all of these things that are affecting things negatively with frequency, it's gonna have a physical reaction because, what is it, as above, so below? The above would be the stuff you don't see. The below is where you are. So yeah, anyway, now I'm rambling, but help me bring it back to the plants, or what you wanted to talk to next about
I
that.
love that. I'm so glad you brought the water side is super interesting. And just a side note on that, this is, as I was sort of researching Orgonite and just these tools we can use to defend ourselves from these frequencies around us. So many people have talked about putting Orgonite around their water supply and noticing
Mm-hmm.
these crazy benefits. And
Yeah.
and you would know this much better than me. You've actually heard these testimonials. Maybe real quick, could you
Yeah.
give us a little more insight on what you've heard from people who've actually used this around
Yeah.
their water?
So I always suggest people should do what's called the water test. This is one of the first things I came across with Orgonite, but basically you'll take a piece of Orgonite. I'm sorry I waited this far into the conversation to show this. This is a tower buster. It looks like a little kind of a hockey puck. You can make these simply in a muffin pan, but it's a block. It's a physical block of Orgonite made out of the materials needed to make Orgonite, basically a resin and different types of metals. I'll elaborate on that in a sec. But for the water test, you put this in the freezer with a cup of water on top of it. And I recommend not using a glass container because it will probably shatter. But what will happen is, so the idea of what's going on with this in orgone is a pattern that's like a fractal pattern. It's spinning through the universe. It, not that, I mean, I don't want to go into like the shape of the earth, but a lot of people believe the universe moves in a certain type of pattern. I do, at least, I don't know, I don't know answers to certain things because I've always been lied to, but I do align with the theories behind orgone moving in a fractal. So it's sort of like a spiral vortex, and that vortex will just keep moving until you interfere with it, and that's the chaos. So this stuff will freeze that pattern into the water. And what happens is, you'll put with your cup of water, you'll end up with like a vortex. I have some of these on my website too, pictures and things. If you type in Orgonite water test, you're going to find a lot of people doing that test because that's one of the first things they do. And I will say, my personal opinion, it only works with a really good piece of Orgonite, because you're going to come across a lot of really bad, poorly made Orgonite. It needs to be packed with metal, and I'll explain more on that. But the water will freeze into this vortex, and you'll get like these needles that are, it's almost like the vortex formed and then blew up, which is why you don't want to use glass. And you'll get these needle spirals, and they're just these microscopic lines. But so someone might say, well, what exactly is happening? This is where I would go, and I would recommend people check out someone's work like Masaru Emoto, because, and again, it's called The Secret of Water, because he's looking at these things with an electron microscope on a real deep level, showing the patterns that water that is like the best water for our cells, the water that goes into our body and actually helps nourish us and isn't just passed through or causing problems, it seems to coincidentally have these patterns, these crystallized patterns in them. And these patterns can be formed or broken apart literally from exerting energy on them and intention. So when you see someone holding a cup of water, I mean, I know tons of people, they bless their water. You. Everyone can do what they want. I like to put my organite, or put my water on organite. And in our home, we have a huge, I mean, people come to our house for water and they think we're ridiculous because we destructure the hell out of it and we distill. Um, and we have certain filters, and we restructure with organite, and we use vortex, and we use, I mean, there's everyone's doing all their own things to water. But I think it's, you can buy a water structuring device that is essentially like a cone that you dump the water in and it'll run through in a vortex because it's a natural pattern of nature, and it will go into your cup and it will restructure that water. But you can also restructure it with things like organite. You can also restructure it if you ever do the elementary science experiment. Just fill a 2-liter bottle. We fill it with put a coffee filter at the bottom, but it's like the dirt, the sand, the rock, the gravel, and the big rocks, and gravity. Like water is structured basically through the earth, and filtration breaks it apart and puts it back together in a more structured way. You can run it through rocks. People will run it through marbles, containers of marbles, and gravity. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but the organite, I like that process because organite is my thing. But that you'll actually get a structured vortex, and you can start comparing things like Emoto's work and show well, it doesn't answer all the questions, but it's another one of the coinkydinks to put in the pile with the plant stuff. Or cats. That's another one. I always say, if you have cats, get some organite and watch your cats and pay attention to how your cats behave, because they're in tune with something. And for some reason, which I mean, I think I know why, but cats love organite. And so somewhere there's a cat lady joke, but yeah, get some organite. Or if you have organite, get some cats. You do you. So
I love that. And I love that. I mean, obviously there's going to be skeptics out there that say, who is this crazy guy selling these little hockey puck things and these long sticks? What is that going to do about these frequencies? This sounds like a total scam. But there are so many tests that you can do. And I purchased your big pack of the cloudbuster. Do you call it Chembusters, cloudbusters?
I think it was those were the little ones. Those are tower busters. The
Tower
idea
busters.
being, because you would, if you want to take them outside of your house, that is the universal tool for, quote, busting a tower. It started with the tower buster back around, I think, the early 90s. So yeah.
Awesome. And I can't wait to do some of these tests myself. I didn't even tell you this before we got on the call, but I brought one in my backpack, and I was going to have it with me on the plane coming over here to Mexico. The motherfuckers took it away at the security. So
they
I don't
didn't
have it
even.
anymore.
Okay, so
Yeah. They took away my steel pan, which I used to cook, and they took away the pocky pot. So
interesting. So for anyone who will ask, because a lot of people do ask that, they'll email. I've never had an issue, and I've gone international. We're to the point where, I went to Costa Rica one time specifically with a duffel bag of nothing but tower busters, and they were so intrigued by it. But I ended up kind of befriending them and because I was like, you guys stand by that damn X-ray thing all day. You should have some of this around. And they were like, I'll take some. So that was maybe luck, but did you carry it on or check it?
I did not check it, and that's what I
Okay.
learned from this experience. Is next time I'm going to check it and
Okay.
check my steel pan and the tower buster.
I always tell
Because
people
it actually wasn't even in the U.S. TSA. It was in Guadalajara on a connecting flight to come over to Mexico City. So you're really just rolling the dice with those people.
I think you are rolling the dice internationally. I would say, if anyone does say what is it, because you can take it out and put it with your laptop, your phone, whatever it is you've got in that tray, and they're like, well, what is that? It's easier when you're using stuff like this, decorative. You're like, it's a tchotchke. Just call it a tchotchke, or call it a good luck charm if you want. You can totally play it down. I've joked with people before and just say, tell them you use it, you put it around you to keep the space aliens away. It's like a tinfoil hat. And just thinking, like, if you make them think you're crazy enough, then there's just no more questions. But again, you just have to play it by ear. I know that you don't want to take Earth pipe. I'm not going to say what everyone already knows what that kind of looks like. These, of course, go in the ground for those wondering. It gets hammered in the ground like a tent stake. These are the best, and these are what I have buried thousands of all over the state of Arizona. Which, if you look, I have all of this is outlined on my website. I outline my projects. I outline my experiments. I outline what I've been doing when, and showing like after the 2020 increase in the 5G and a really lackluster monsoon season, I went out full force I got together friends. I dropped every last dollar I had and spent months gifting this stuff around the entire state. And 2021 and 2022 are two of the wettest monsoon seasons on record. I think actually 21 was the second and 22 was the first. But of course, it's a never-ending battle because like there's a billion new towers today that there weren't, 2-3 years ago. But people can go to my website and look at that stuff and see sort of if you want to see some of that chronological stuff, it's like I used to blog more because when I first moved here in 2018, I spent the first few months gifting, and I live here in Sedona. The average snowfall, if you're lucky, is maybe a few inches, and we had 15 inches on New Year's Eve. After that was about 60 days, about 90 days we lived here. And when we got here, all my counterpart and I were doing was traveling around the state and gifting as much of this stuff as we could. And all of a sudden, it just lots of rain. It's like, wow, it's a real wet winter. And then all of a sudden, in May of 2019, the governor declared the drought over, and Lake Mead, that everyone hears about being dead, is packed to capacity, and Lake Powell's packed to capacity. And even to this day, those things are full. They've had to divert water out of it, but you never hear those sides of the story. They just say we know how the climate stuff goes. If it's not doom and gloom, they don't talk about it, but there are positive things happening about it. So anyway, yeah, sorry about losing the piece
Hey, that's
on
part of
that.
the learning process. I hope people can listen to this, and when they go get some, they don't make the same mistake as me.
I wish I don't know anyone in Mexico specifically who at least doing it on a level like me. I know a couple folks in the UK for those international, or those I know down in Africa. There's a spearhead down there, George Ritchell. I do try. So, and here's actually something, because you said naysayers before, or skeptics, or whatever the word was. I don't just have, like, people think, oh, he's selling something. I can count on one hand the number of times, I am tooting my horn for a second, but I can count on one hand the number of times in 7 years I've ever promoted myself or my shop on social media, because I also have, the majority of my website is educational resources, including tutorials, downloads, videos, how to make it. I do small, I don't want to say seminars, but I do a lot of one-on-one stuff with people if they're interested. I've given a number of talks in person, and I've never, at least to date, never charged for it. I've done everything pretty selflessly, and I try to put my money where my etheric mouth is. So to the skeptics, it's like I've always tried to maintain this philosophy, because I get very irritated at how, like, if you look at COVID is the greatest thing in the world to happen to so many people financially, for their fame, their fortune, the whole, even in the truther movement even. So it's like you have to tread lightly, and it's corrupted a lot of people, I think. So I try really hard to offer, like, I know not everyone's going to want to make it, but I have a lot of hands-on one-on-one, and I answer hundreds of emails. Right now, I'd say hundreds of emails a week, that when people email me, it's like you get directly to me, and I get directly back to you to answer questions. And anyone who, if you go look at the reviews on my website, I think it would help encourage people a little bit, that there's a there. And, I have a habit. I go by the name the Orgone Donor for a reason. I was playing on organ donor, obviously, but the idea, organite gifting is the name of the game. So who pays for it? Well, you do if you're the one doing the gifting. So I have done all of this. I maintain a job that has nothing to do with this in order to help fund it, because it's immensely expensive. But the name, as my name implies, uh, it's I'm trying to have this philosophy that is, when I say I really want to help the earth, that I actually stand by what I'm saying. So I just want to put that out there. It's hard to say things like that without coming off egotistical, and I apologize if it ever comes off that way to people. But just that you will learn, especially if you want to ever get into this, you will very quickly learn how, for every 100 people that tell you, "Hey, I want to help," or I want to do something. It's like words, actions speak louder than words, and those actions, it's a lot. There's a lot fewer humans on Earth doing those actions. Just keep that in mind. So,
Absolutely. I'd like to take a little bit of a pivot here as we start to really drive this home with Orgonite. And this name that you brought up earlier, Dr. Wilhelm Reich, I think that it would be really excellent to give people just a total 101 on where this idea came from in the first place. Because we sort of sprinkled it throughout. Now we're getting, going into like what it can
yeah.
actually do. But where did this idea even come from? Who is this character, Dr. Wilhelm Reich? Who was he? What did he bring to the world that people should know about? And how did it get us to this point to where we are now talking about this Orgonite stuff on a podcast?
Yeah. So, what the research that you will find when you look up his name, the general consensus is he was a doctor and psychoanalyst, and there's a lot of correlation between his work and Sigmund Freud. Um, he was supposedly a student, and they hit a fork in the road where eventually what Freud was doing. I mean, I know there. I do not like Sigmund Freud. As opposed to Wilhelm Reich, because there are experiments that go on when it pertains to the sexual energy and the livelihood of individuals, but some of those individuals being children. And I don't like those. I didn't like where that history was. So I don't know. I'm hoping that if the stories about him are true, because I take everything with a grain of salt, including the stuff that makes me most comfortable. I wonder if that might be why there was a break. But the basis behind his research was that, why he called it orgone, it's based on the term orgasm. It's based on the idea that there is this energy. Now, when you look at sexual energy, it is the basis of life. All of the life, and at least in this realm, I'm not trying to giggle like a school kid, but like when you think about all of the things in the world that have the most positive or energetic feeling or euphoria or whatever, you can pick up what I'm putting down by this, to say like this may be why the basis is of sexual energy. Where does it come from? What reaction does it have on everything else in the physical? And so in his work, like he wrote a book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, which is really relevant right now, basically showing like his basis was people would be broken down through this energy and create a type of armor. That armor would block them from their connection to others, their connection to themselves, their connection to their creator, and their connection to all of life down here. So again, throwing everything out of alignment. And in that book, I would encourage people to read it, because it will explain exactly why people worship and want people to be dictators and control them, and that it's because of the general foundation is all of this energy that's been manipulated and bastardized and thrown off into chaos has this type of physical reaction. You essentially worship these fake deities to rule over you, because you are essentially broken from cradle to grave on a deeper sexual energy level. And so um, when he was doing, well, here, actually, I'll jump into one of his tools to help bridge a gap here. So the orgone accumulator, the accumulator box, this was a device that he created that it kind of looks, picture like a refrigerator box size object that is hollow inside, and a person will sit inside in a chair. And the reason he called it an orgone accumulator is that it is accumulating this energy to the center of that box. So whatever is inside of that box is going to have this energy flowing through them and being concentrated. So the way that it worked, or the theory behind why it worked, is that it was made out of materials that either attract or repel certain energy fields. So by layering these layers, like he called it organic and inorganic material. So an organic material might be cotton, linen, sheepskin, wood, and then an inorganic might be sheet metal. It might be steel wool. It might be, like aluminum siding, for example. There's a reason siding is on people's houses. That's a whole other can of worms. But you would layer these things in this box to make the box, and the box would then harness this energy to the center. So having people conduct these therapy sessions inside of the box, I have to be careful in case the FDA is listening to this as well. But he would probably use the C word, CURE, as far as cancer and infertility, and making these connections between what was it that caused the body to start forming cancer in the first place. Because it is, essentially cells taking over and they spread, but it's more parasitic than anything. And Reich was doing work that I think kind of a lot of people wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, because he talked about things like parasites. He talked about something he called off-worlders, and one of his famous quotes, and I'll butcher it, it ended with him saying, it was in analyzing this reality and basically trying to figure out what has invaded our earthly existence. There is something feeding on the good. There is something feeding on life, because it can't exist itself. And this goes right back to when we were talking about the natural versus the artificial. And it's like the artificial is a parasite, essentially. So he talked a lot about what would possibly be feeding on us, or feeding on the good, and then using these tools to concentrate that good back into them to repair the bad that had been transmuted into them and cause things like cancer or the inability to bear children. So in addition to those experiments, though, and this is where I'm trying to branch out and say, like, everyone thinks geoengineering is an agenda in and of itself. And I say geoengineering is actually a byproduct and a symptom of a much bigger agenda, which I would just call reality manipulation, because the weather is part of reality. And if you mess up this over here, you mess up this over there. And so he started conducting experiments on the atmosphere with what he called a cloudbuster. And it was essentially concentrating orgone, what he believed to be orgone, into the atmosphere. And it could be used for things like rain production. I'm one of the few people I know that I wholeheartedly believe, and I know that's a dirty word to some people, I believe the weather is an energetic process, not a physical one. That conditions have to be met in the ether. And I'm a goofy one who thinks that trees actually act as antenna to tell clouds where to form. And it's all electromagnetically, if you want to look at it on a physics standpoint. They're signals. They are receptors sending out signals. For this reason, a lot of natives do have rain dances that do in fact work. And it's like, how is this possible? Probably because they're sending out those same signals of some kind. So bringing it back to Reich, he started working on these experiments in the desert, of all places, down in Tucson. He came to Arizona to show that deserts were not natural. And this is a philosophy I stand by, that deserts are not natural, because the earth is it's life. This place is alive as much as we are, and life doesn't kill itself. So then you have to say, well, then what? This goes to his parasite theories. It's like, what is it that's causing desertification? What is it that's causing, and people want to blame carbon and whatever. And it's like, that's not it. There's an energy here, or a frequency here, that is helping in tandem with all these other things that are being blasted with the frequency. but it's what I would call terraforming. Other people use that term too, terraforming, that you are changing this place into something unnatural. So in the case of Reich and the cloudbuster, he went out into the desert and he was able to grow grass in the middle of the desert out of nothing. And he did different experiments. I think it's like, I guess you just call it the Bion experiment, showing that even if you enclose, you can sterilize something like when you're canning stuff, you can sterilize, you can get rid of the bacteria, you can nuke the inside of a jar and seal it, and there can be nothing, and it can be non-permeable, nothing can get inside that jar, and yet you can still grow life from inside that jar. And it's like, well, where does that come from? It's like it's being pulled in from somewhere, which sounds really bizarre, but it's those theories about this energetic component to creating life or destroying life somehow seems to affect the human body, or seems to affect nature, seems to affect, I think, everything down to migratory patterns of birds and bees. People think about bees and 5G and all that stuff, and it's like, yeah, they rely on frequency. Bumblebees hover, they don't fly, their wings make a hovering sound that makes them levitate. It doesn't make them zoom through the air with wind or lift. And so when you start messing up those frequencies, everything's out of alignment. So the cloudbuster, which is what this thing behind me, we call this a cloudbuster. I prefer to call it a chembuster. The reason I call it a chembuster, well, because the person who invented it did. When you dive into the Orgonite work, you'll come across Don and Carol Croft. They're two people, I would call them the pioneers of the orgone gifting movement. I would also then tell you right away, though, that there is not a movement. And one of the best things going for Orgonite gifting, there isn't a movement. There shouldn't be a movement, because movements, no, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you are, they will always get infiltrated. So it's like, this is an endeavor you do on your own, but everyone's doing it alone together. So, or you do it with someone you trust with your life, but the cloudbuster or chembuster, the reason we say chem is because it breaks apart chemtrails. That's a whole can of worms, and people can go to my website and look at the videos on that.
I watched a video on that
Basic,
on Twitter recently. Sorry to interrupt, but I saw a video
yeah,
of
yeah.
someone actually putting one of these out in their yard, and the cloud
Mm-hmm.
the haze just clears away. Blew my mind.
It's
Because I've heard
so,
about this happening. It sounded kind of woo woo, but I mean, when you actually see it happening, it's real.
yeah, it's so there is a component of these, and I ground these. So there is a component with the tube that they are basically deionizing the sky. They're de-electrifying it, I guess. So you might, you can physically see that stuff disappear, that's sort of being discharged. It's built up with all the frequency technology, and then it's being quickly discharged. And the Earth is one giant filter. I mean, the Earth will clean everything. That's not an excuse to obviously pollute, but the Earth will clean this cycle here. If we would stop polluting it, it would be heaven on earth, probably. I assume it would be, because it would be clean. And so, yeah, but the cloudbuster thing is, I call it kind of like it's an atmospheric cleanser. And I have put, I don't know how many of these around the desert. And this isn't to discourage people from saying, well, I could never do that, or I'm not going to do that many, so there's no point. But I think I've put somewhere around like 60 of these around the entire state, and through the help of friends, and just certain undisclosed locations. But you do this thing in tandem with tower busting, where you put orgonite around all of your EMF devices. You put orgonite around the cell towers. You put orgonite around, very concentrated power lines. Anywhere you're going to have electrical burn off, LED lighting, the EMF, the Wi-Fi, the smart meters, all that typical stuff, because it's essentially all operating together to create that web. So you break apart the web using the tower busters. I tell everyone with a home or the ability to put something in the ground, if you can, put some earth pipes in the ground around your home, especially if you have crappy neighbors that love all their tech toys. Between doing those two things, busting the small stuff that feeds the fence, and then using something like a cloud buster look at it, it's got 6 pipes. It kind of looks like people say it looks like a Gatling gun. It's a sky bazooka. It's a etheric bazooka for the ether that basically works on something going on in the sky that works in tandem with something down here on the ground. That something on the ground would be all the towers. The something in the sky would be the geoengineering efforts, the chemtrails, and things like that. But I do think as time goes on, and this is something I have on my website, and this is in more detail. I know in other, like, there are some podcasts I've done where it's like you just go complete full cray cray from the starting gate, and they're wormholes. But some of those conversations, I have made statements like, I don't think they need chemtrails, or they're not going to for long because technology is changing, and that there's this bigger component about the frequency of this realm than just pumping things into the atmosphere. And so I think, like, when I hear people say, like, oh, I haven't seen chemtrails in a long time, I'm like, yeah, look for the towers. I bet you've got 10 billion new towers all on the ground next to you that the grid is set up. And there's probably some more things that have been launched in the sky. I don't know whether people believe in satellites or satelloons. I'm sure something up there, and there is something up there. There are technologies we aren't privileged to that keep things in the sky, regardless of whatever shape people want to believe this place is. And so, it's moving in a way that I think we'll see less in the sky, but we won't see a reduction as far as the weather manipulation. It just means it's the end of one age and the beginning of another, basically. So
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to start wrapping this up with some happy stories.
sure,
We've
yeah,
sprinkled a few around here, and they're definitely out there. Just, you talked about how it's so easy to put it around like your water or your garden or your cat. You instantly see these effects. I haven't gotten to test these myself, but I really encourage people out there to try this. Um, I'd love to hear just, first of all, your experience bringing Orgonite into your life, what you saw, with like your sort of rabbit hole journey into this. Because I know that
hmm
I listened to one of your other podcasts where you talked about you're living in Chicago, I believe, using
hmm
the metro system, and you started carrying this around your backpack, and you
yeah,
noticed interesting effects like in the beginning. So could you maybe walk me through your story of
yeah.
how you started to see this affect people around you and the energy around you?
Yeah. So I don't have an explanation of why this happened, but one observation was that my interactions with other people, now when you live in a place like Chicago, I took the blue line every day and it's packed. You're around thousands and thousands of people day after day. And a lot of those people habitually, same, you get to see the same faces because everyone, you fall in the same work cycles of people. And it was bizarre that out of the gate, people seemed to be reacting to me differently. If I did have to have an encounter, people were smiley, people were friendly, people
Sorry,
made
sorry to
eye
interrupt. This is when you put these the hockey puck
carrying
power
them
busters
around.
in your backpack, right?
Yeah, so I just
Okay.
like started taking them with, because I took them with me everywhere I went. I went, and put them everywhere. I left them everywhere I went, and so carrying this stuff around, it seemed like the reactions of people were different, and actually on two different spectrums. I talked with Daniel about this in his show as well, which he encountered also with the reactions of people. And it was just really, it's like one of those bizarre coinky dinks that's like people who tend to lean more positive, I think it sort of enhances that. People who are toxically negative, it also enhances that. And I equate that to sort of like they're probably under the influence of something on a bad energy vibe, and you're killing it off like a drug. So it's kind of like a withdrawal symptom, and they're pissed. So it's like you see these weird reactions with people. Um, that was one of the first things. And also, not that, I don't believe you can manifest the lottery numbers, but I do believe that putting this stuff in your everyday life, it's like there are just weird things that even no matter how bad it gets, it seems like things tend to go your way a bit more. Um, I do with that as you want. It's really hard to explain. It's one of those observations that, this is actually spoken through a lot of the reviews people have written on my website, and just different conversations. If you look up, obviously Don and Carol Croft. look up George Ritchell. He has a website called Organize Africa, and he's been doing this since I think like 2002. Before that, Don and Carol have been doing it since I think the early 90s. But there are different people out there doing these experiments or who have all this collective uh, observation. And that's why even I can say like right now, if someone said, would you bet your life on it that Organite is doing exactly what you, well, I'd say soul, actually. Sorry, let me rephrase. Would you bet your soul? Because I think my soul is more important than my body. Would you bet your soul that Organite is doing exactly what you say it's doing? I wouldn't take that bet. But what I have found is that after 8 years of trying to find a there has continued to be a there, setting out to prove something wrong. Because people will say, oh, you got confirmation bias. I'm like, I set out to prove it wrong and have spent 8 years being pleasantly surprised. And so pleasantly surprised that that I would be an idiot if I stopped and didn't keep going. I have only been given enough to know this is worth, just keep going and just never stop with this. Um, Maybe that day would happen in the future. I don't see a reality where it does. So that's one of those things I'll tell people as far as the reactions and what you see. It's very difficult to explain why would any of this happen. There are people who have said that certain events that were coming up in their area, they went and gifted, and all of a sudden these very bad events, they somehow they were called off, they were canceled, they just didn't happen. um, there have been claims, well, actually no, I won't go there.
I mean,
People have
I'd love
just,
to hear more of these testimonials. Feel free to
well,
rattle some off.
so for myself, like now when I started doing this, I was taking in so many, like there's not a ton of information about it on the internet, but of the people I could find in these weird little like subreddit type environments, and people are whispering to each other and like, well, I've done this and I've done that. And I thought, you know what, I'll play. I worked down in what I would call the most toxic place in Chicago. Is basically Federal Plaza. There, I worked next to, the IRS, Social Security. I was right next door to a prison, a state prison. The worst damn post office with the worst possible people you could imagine. It's ranked worst in the country. Um, just like, and the Federal Reserve, if I didn't say that, but it's like all these things in this area, and lots of monuments and weird architecture and things that I just find really off-putting. But I think Chicago is called Chicago for a reason. That's another conversation for like second or third time. But energetically, I was in this toxic place. There was supposed to be there was a rally that was scheduled that I think was supposed to have, this was in 2015, around 2015, 16, before the election. And there was a rally for the left that I don't know if the Queen Bee Hillary was supposed to make an appearance, but it was right across the street from where I worked. And so I was like, okay, I put a cloudbuster in my office. I went around and anywhere I could get that I could have permission to plant some things in the ground, I did. And then everything else, I'm one of those ask for forgiveness, not for permission type people. So everywhere else in between, I mean, I just every day for a few weeks taking a backpack of tower busters. And then I always joke I lose this in a boating accident. So it's like doing that for a really long time and creating a grid. And then what happened was there was no rally. It was canceled. And I thought, all I could say, and I have no idea if I had anything to do with that. And that's fine. I just think it's another one of those things that went in the coincidence pile where it's like, okay, we can put that in the black book and I'll write it down for next time. I have heard plenty of other people who've talked about just some of the most bizarre stories that, if you talk about anyone who's built a cloudbuster, you've probably been visited by the black helicopters. And people are like, what the hell? Like there is you can, I don't want to say Google as a verb. I got to stop doing that. But look up Organite or Chembuster, Cloudbuster, and helicopter. There's some weird anomalies that happen in the sky when you start putting like this kind of stuff is in really heavily, densely concentrated EMF locations. You're messing up a bubble. And the black helicopter one, I like to, I mean, everyone's seen the Matrix movies. I don't understand half of this reality. I feel like the more you learn, the less you know. But I do think it's possible. Like, I like to think of it as Mr. Smith is making a visit to your reality because you are screwing up the matrix. You are screwing up his matrix. So it's kind of like in the movie where they bounce around from people to people. We've all heard the term NPCs at this point, I'm sure. So I think it's like the same way the agents in those movies bounce around between what I assume is the NPC. It's like Mr. Smith makes an appearance in the form of a helicopter, and they hover weird, and people are like, aren't you afraid? Aren't you this? Aren't you that? It's like, not really, no. If anything, we start to laugh at it because it says we really don't know jack about where we are in this universe. So, yeah.
I'm so glad I brought you on, man.
I mean,
This is amazing.
again, like, so to anyone that I don't want to plug other people's stuff and be disrespectful, or I hope it doesn't sound disrespectful. But I would like to say 2 resources I think that would be great for anyone who has listened to the two of us just talk. So there was an episode I did on a show called the Terrain Theory Podcast. That I did back, I think, around January or February of this year. And it does get a little crash course into some of these topics we've grazed. So I would think you should kind of peruse my website a little bit and look a little more at look at the basis of like, where does orgonite come from? How do you make good orgonite? What are the materials used? And like, what is all these theories on what can be going on? Because it's not as simple as, like, I used to think you just were busting a tower when you put the orgonite around it and then you walk away and that's it. But now it's like there's a lot of this sort of collective idea coming from everyone doing it, that you're changing the frequency of those towers, that you're actually creating a positive energy generator by keeping this stuff around all of those EMF sources, because EMF sources could be created in a way that is harmonic with life. You can create Wi-Fi that doesn't shred through DNA and tear people apart on every level imaginable, but yet they don't. And it's like, well, I wonder why, But that particular podcast, it got really deep on a lot of the etheric topics. But for those that want to explore that and sort of like what I did, reverse engineer this idea, I basically I felt like I was learning more about Earth and reality the more I learned about these deeper energy topics, because when you see that the universe really truly is energy, frequency, and vibration, then you can actually reverse engineer the theory, or come to these conclusions, better conclusions of, why did this war happen? Why is money what it is? Why is everything converting from fiat to this? And why did it's like this episode of human history, and why do people act like this? And you can start to dissect those physicals and from an etheric standpoint. So it was definitely one of my favorites. And it was also very tame, because people who listen to me long enough know I talk like a sailor sometimes. But it was very kid friendly. I think as far as like, maybe the subjects are deep, the language is not. So it's like, a little safer. I would always give disclaimers with other shows, because I get more comfortable with certain people. If I get too comfortable, and then we're like, oh, we're buddies, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, let the colorful language fly off. But anyway, just, yeah, so there are things on my website, and I do descriptions under those shows as well. I'll obviously do one under this as well too. So it's like, that way it refers everybody on a level that they think fits, based on where they are. So that, because I don't ever want it to be overwhelming. The only thing I want out of any of this is, I just want people to never assume they figured it out, and to never stop questioning, including the things that make you incredibly uncomfortable, not just the stuff that you like. So, because I want to make a T-shirt that says, this is mostly for new age people, but like it says, I believe in infinite possibilities, dot dot dot, except the things I don't like or the things that make me uncomfortable, because that seems to be a common thread amongst a lot of people in the truth community now. And I want to we need to take that back basically and say, we were criticizing people who didn't want to learn and they're NPCs and whatever. It's like, well, let's not take a note from their playbook and just get to a plateau that we like and then say, okay, I'm done. I figured it out. The government's bad, like whatever. So yeah, just that's all I want is so pick your I don't want to say pick your poison, pick your recipe and and just go from there. So
I could not agree more with that. Just the idea of trying to be a beacon of inspiration to continue learning and not act like we are the experts. I'm certainly no expert, let alone on this stuff. I'm still very new to this world. But just getting all these new resources for people to dig into is so valuable. I know that there's so many people out there who are starting to wake up to these things, and they're looking for more to dig into, to learn, to continue studying. And I'm glad you just recommended that other podcast you went on as sort of the next step. I would also, on the flip side, give maybe an earlier episode that I might recommend to friends and family would be what I mentioned earlier. My number 33 on my podcast was Zaid Dahaj. We really gave like the super basics on like human earth energy connection, EMFs, that sort of thing on like a very beginner level. So I think maybe if I were to be sending something to my family, I'd send them that one and then this one later. And man, this is going to be the most beautifully convoluted description full of links I've ever made. It's so many things. Another one I want to recommend is your episode with Daniel Prince on the Once Bitten podcast, as I mentioned earlier. I owe so much to Daniel. He has been dragging me down all sorts of fun rabbit holes as a fellow Bitcoin podcaster. So he's doing great work, and I really recommend people go check him out. We talked about some books. You mentioned Alana Freeland, who I've heard constantly recommended by people really going into this realm as just like the best books to read to get started. Are there any other books that you would throw out as like things you'd really recommend as something people could start adding to their collection?
yeah, they're a little dry, but obviously from Reich, the general Bible is going to be called Ether, God, and Devil, Cosmic Super in Position. And then as far as the Cloudbuster, that if people want to learn more about that and like the whole concept of the off-worlders and the parasitic stuff and what might be out there, there's a book called Contact with Space. Um, I'm trying to think, and then and well, for people shits and giggles, I would say like the Mass Psychology of Fascism is just an interesting take if you want to um, just kind of see. I think it's a really good fortune teller for the next few years, and it's really relevant now. It's been relevant since it was written, but it's relevant now because it seems like the worshiping of this savior complex, and giving away sovereignty, the idea of being okay with a ruler and also wanting and asking for complete chaos. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you want fascism? Uh, so it's just an interesting take from that component. And then I'm trying to think because I always have I have a laundry list of a few books. Um, I think I'll leave it at that. There's others by other authors, but I list some of these things on my website as well. Um, when you get into things like moon cycles and astrology and the sunrise and the sunset and their connections to things like geoengineering, then you get into some. It's just the more you learn, the less you know. That really, I think, if people would remember that and that it's okay to say, like, I mean, this is why I wouldn't take that bet because I know 8 years in, every day I learn something new and it's never going to, I don't think it ever is supposed to end. And I also don't know that we're supposed to ever completely understand everything. I don't know. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, start with those books I name as far as learning this component. So
Mitch the Orgone Donor. My expectations were high for this conversation, but they have been exceeded. This has been a wonderful conversation. Definitely the deepest I think I've ever gone on a podcast, and that is just a huge blessing. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to me for 2 hours today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited to be in this on this team with you of just helping people continue to learn and experiment and find ways that they can create better health for themselves and the world and nature and this energy field around us. It's impossible to not get super deep on this stuff, but sometimes you got to. We got to go there sometimes. So this will be a little bit of a bomb dropped onto my listeners who have been hearing about orange coin and meat for a while, but I think it's one that needs to be heard here. And I think that all those resources we just dropped will be great places for people to continue looking. So, yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today. Thank you so much for coming by.
I absolutely appreciate it. Thank you so much.